There may have been doubters out there. They have been proven wrong. We have made it all the way to the postseason with very little interruption considering what could have been. And 6A doesn't play this week. 5A, there's one game in the entire state that plays this week. Everybody in the Fort Wayne area isn't playing, so we'll talk about that next week because there are some really good matchups, especially when it comes to 6A locally.
Yes.
But we'll start with 4A. Sectional 19 here in round one. This is one of the most interesting sectionals. Justin Kinney of Optimum Performance Sports, I didn't introduce you, joining us now. This is the one that seems the most, out of the sectionals that we have locally, this is the one that seems the most competitive to me. You've got Columbia City at East Noble. That's going to be our highlight zone game of the week. Angola at DeKalb, Leo at Northridge, Wawasee at Northwood. A lot of good teams in this one. Let's start off with Columbia City at East Noble. We had that question at the beginning of the season when Columbia City started 6-0, and you realize how backloaded their schedule is with the tougher teams in the Northeast state. They lost 3 of them, East Noble, Leo, and Norwell last week when they had Norwell on the ropes down at their place. How does Columbia City bounce back, learn from those 3 games, and give East Noble a run for their money in Kendallville on Friday night?
Well, it's two teams going in completely different directions, isn't it? You have Columbia City that's lost 3 straight. East Noble has gotten back on track, now sitting at 5-3. And while Columbia City let that game get away last week, I think offensively in particular, they found some things that worked, especially against a very good defense in Norwell. Greg Bolt in particular, throwing for over 300 yards, 4 touchdowns last week. So if you're trying to find a silver lining for the Eagles, it's that the offense found some rhythm last week, but they're going to have a challenge now going back to Kendallville, where they lost 27-10 just a couple weeks ago, and see if they can get that offensive boost and take it into the playoffs.
Yeah, if you're Columbia City, what do you learn from that game? Because I think Columbia City's Achilles heel in these games that they've lost is they'll go up early. But they aren't able to hold it. That's what they did against East Noble. That's what they did against Norwell. Good first quarters. They just hadn't sustained it throughout the course of the game. How do they go about changing that, and how can East Noble use what they learned to not get themselves in a hole early against Columbia City? Because Columbia City is a team that does have good passing game with Greg Bolt, as you mentioned. They can come back from a deficit if they have to.
Yeah, they can. East Noble, I think, has some momentum here based on the first game between those two teams, limiting that to Columbia City to 10 points, but also getting Rowan Zolman back the last couple weeks. That helps immeasurably. They played Columbia City without Zolman the first time around. And I think whether it's Dalton Stinson, Cole Schupbach at quarterback for East Noble, they're able to get the ball in space to their playmakers. Justin Marcellus has been solid as always. So it's tough to go to Kendallville and win at any time, especially on the road. And Columbia City, especially the latter half of the year, has looked a little shaky on the road. Even that win earlier in the year against DeKalb that they had to hold on in overtime and win.
Yeah.
So they play a lot more confidently at home, but you have to think, okay, can Brett Fox get that team redirected, do a 180, take the last 3 weeks of the season, and take the good out of that into the playoffs?
Angola at DeKalb, we saw that in week 1. It was Angola, Tucker Hasselman, and those guys running all over them. I want to talk about Leo and Northridge because on paper this is also one of the better matchups we see in the area in week 1. Leo 8-1, Northridge 6-3. And the thing that strikes me about Northridge, just looking at the numbers, they've had 4 shutouts this year, and they're only giving up 13.5 points a game. So, Leo doesn't put a ton of points on the board. They grind the clock, and we've seen it with the running game. But this is a Northridge team that has slowed some people down in the season.
Almost mirror images of each other. Good defenses, solid running games. They don't like to go vertical when they don't have to. They like to grind out victories. So Northridge has looked really good against an admittedly down schedule in the Northern Lakes a little bit. Northwood down. Warsaw, of course, wins that conference. So, but I still think it's a very quality conference that Northridge was able to play in. So when you look at what can happen in this game, Leo having to go on the road, play a team that is very stingy defensively. Points are going to be at a premium in this one. Is the running game of Leo up to the task of playing probably the best defense it has played all year?
Yeah, I think when you say postseason, running game generally travels, defense generally travels. That's really the bread and butter. And the offensive line of Leo with Landon Livingston and the guys, pretty good as well. And that junior class that's really talented now has a lot of, 2 seasons of varsity football under its belt.
No longer underclassmen, for sure.
Let's talk about 4A Sectional 20. You got Marion, who's 6-3 at Mrs. Sinawa, who's 5-4. New Haven at Southside, Huntington North at Wayne, and Jay County at Delta. How do you see this one playing out? I would assume just mathematically that Marion, even though they've got their coach is in his first year now as the head coach of the Little Giants. Marion probably goes in as the favorite in this, but we've seen in years past you can't count out a team that's in the bottom half of the SAC once they've gotten beaten up on and played up in competition once you get to the postseason, even if their record doesn't look so good.
Yeah, you have Marion up top, you have Delta at the bottom that I think are the two favorites, but the two games that jump out to me that so many people are glossing over is, as you mentioned, the NHC versus SAC showdowns of this one, New Haven and South, and Huntington North and Wayne. And we saw just a couple years ago, was it 4 years ago, Southside take down in convincing fashion a pretty solid Leo team.
I remember that.
In the sectional. So I think when you look at these, they're two winnable games for both South and Wayne. It's dangerous for New Haven to go to South. And conversely, Huntington North is going to want to run the football, but can it contain Wayne's athletes, particularly on the perimeter and downfield? So when we're looking for sexy matchups in the first round, kind of difficult, but I think those two games in particular jump out. Are they for sectional championships? Probably not, but they also could create some intrigue on Friday.
And we could use some of our local teams to win so that we don't have to make trips to Delta and we don't have to make trips to Marion.
That would help. Right?
Yes, it would be beneficial. So go ahead. Teams and win. 3A sectional 26. You're talking about Lakeland at Mishawaka Marion. Mishawaka Marion 7-0, ranked number 2 in the state in 3A. South Bend, Washington at Tippecanoe Valley. Jimtown at Garrett. And John Glenn at West Noble. Mishawaka Marion goes in, obviously, as a heavy favorite in this one, but we know Jimtown has a good postseason history. So how do you see this one playing out? Can anybody challenge Mishawaka Marion at this point?
No.
There you go.
Moving on. No, but Mishawaka Marion 7-0, very good. And
I appreciate the succinct answer because I mean it is what it is, right? Like
let's
on paper,
not waste our time.
I haven't looked at the predictions from John Harrell's, but I imagine they're like probably a 75 to 80% favorite in this one.
You throw Jimtown potentially could rise up and give them a game, but on paper, as long as Mishawaka Marion shows out and plays to its potential, it should win. But the great unknown in all of these sectionals throughout the state is, do we have a team that at some point is sidelined due to COVID, and then that could throw everything up for grabs.
That is true. Let's move on to 3A Sectional 27, because I think this is a game where maybe, as you were mentioned, not as sexy as some people might think by just looking at it on paper, but Concordia at Peru intrigues me. Peru 7-2, I know that's in the TRC, and Concordia's 4-5, and that's in the SAC. But you've got that matchup, and then you've got Oak Hill at Belmont, Northwestern at Maconaquah, Heritage at Norwell. Concordia at Peru, how does this one strike you, given that Concordia, even though they've lost their last 2 games, they played Carroll, who's a 6A school, pretty good 6A school, within 10 points, and then Northside, a solid 5A program, to overtime last week. And this is a 3A school.
You look at Concordia and you feel like they're in a good shape because they're going to a team that they beat by 50 last year in the playoffs. Peru, it's a soft 7-2. We've seen in years past when Peru enters the playoffs with a decent record, they can't hang with Concordia. They can't hang with Norwell more often than not. The problem with Concordia is their injuries have kind of mounted. They're playing beat up. And then with the way the brackets plays out, they're going to have to go to Peru and then likely have to go to Oak Hill because Oak Hill's on the road this week, and the bottom team will host when both are on the road. So you have to think even before Concordia gets to Norwell, which we feel like it's Concordia-Norwell for the sectional championship, they're going to have to go on the road twice and beat 2 not horrible programs to get there. So for a team that got beat up throughout the SAC and got a lot of experience for sure, man, they have a lot of bumps and bruises on Concordia and have no breaks for the next couple weeks, whereas Norwell, they don't have to coast, but they're also at the bottom half of the bracket where it's pretty open, 2 relatively easy games for the Knights.
Yeah, Concordia would have to face Peru, who's 7-2, and then if Oak Hill wins, they're 7-3 at Oak Hill, and then Norwell would be 10-1 when they played them in the sectional championship
tough road
game.
for the Cadets, man.
The more I think about it, that is pretty darn tough. When you take a look at 2A sectional 35, Woodland at Prairie Heights, Eastside at Bluffton, Whitco at Lure, Central Noble at Fairfield. The one you circle here is obviously Eastside at Bluffton. You're talking about 2 teams that are 8-1. Bluffton, we've only seen them against elite competition really once, and that was the 60-0 loss at South Adams. I would have liked to see Bluffton against Adams Central.
Yes.
Instead of, I think they ended up playing Greensburg that week.
Played Prairie Heights. They picked up Heights that week. Yeah, Greensburg was earlier. They had to pick up, I think that was their Southern Wells week.
Okay, so that's where I was confused. But 8-1, and again, like we said, it would have been nice to see them against Adams Central because that was kind of the measuring stick to me. Can you get past 1-2 in the ACAC if you're Bluffton this season? They put up really good numbers, especially offensively. How do you see this one playing out? Because we know what Eastside is capable of.
Yeah, and that Adams Central game would have been a great barometer game because it's a common opponent, right? Eastside played them earlier in their season and won that game with 21-14, I believe. So it would have been a good barometer to see where exactly Bluffton is at. When you look at these two teams on paper, they're both 8-1. Looks like a really good matchup, right? But as you mentioned, we have not seen Bluffton beat a really good team. You could throw Greensburg in there, and it took a lot of moxie to go there and come from behind and win against a Greensburg team that's pretty solid. But man, when you look at Eastside and just how dominant they have been against the majority of the opponents they have played, even with Bluffton's offense that is very good, can that defense get enough stops against Eastside? I think it's up for grabs at this point. I think Eastside is a sizable favorite going into this one, but maybe Bluffton can surprise.
Yeah, and if you're Eastside, I mean, you're coming off a win against Angola last week where they looked dominant in all three phases of the game. Right. They win 42-7 at Angola. I know Angola has been missing parts here and there all season long when they've actually been playing.
Right, yeah.
But when you look at Eastside, how does Todd Mason have this team poised now that they got the experience of making a deeper run in the postseason last year with their first ever sectional championship to make a run to regionals, to semi-state, to state this season?
Well, it's difficult to see past sectionals. I think we come into this one and say, okay, they're the decided favorite in this one. Although Fairfield lurking at the bottom, and I also don't think we can discount Bishop Luers. So many times we've seen Bishop Luers the lesser in terms of record, but also playing good football. I thought they played pretty solid against Snyder last Friday in being there. So if Eastside can get through the sectional, you look at how it's laying out, and they get an Eastbrook rematch. Kind of that's what we're looking at right now. They were beaten soundly last year at Eastbrook. Can they rebound? Is this a better football team in Eastside? But as we know, 2A in regional usually goes through Eastbrook. And it's shaping up to be that very thing, whether it's Eastside, whether it's Luers, whether it's Fairfield out of this one.
Yeah, I like to see the bottom half. If Fairfield ends up meeting Luers in the second round, I think that's going to be a real interesting matchup.
Absolutely.
But, Central Noble's actually played up to the competition when they've played good teams for the most part this year.
Yep.
I like the job Hayden Kilgore's doing there. Let's talk 1A now. 1A sectional 43. We're going to talk about that next week. The matchups are very
skewed.
Very skewed this week. So we're going to talk South Adams, Tri, Monroe Central. That's all next. That gets a lot more interesting next week.
Yeah.
But 1A sectional 44, Busco at Triton, Adams Central at Fremont, North Miami at Caston, Northfield at Southwood. Northfield Southwood. This is a game. A team comes in for Northfield 6-3. They scored over 60 points last week. Southwood's 9-0. They've run the table in that TRC yet again. But Northfield got them in the postseason last year in the second round. How do you see this one playing out? I know it's not a programs that we normally cover every single Friday night, but this is going to be a good football game because you're talking about a Southwood team with Alex Farr and those guys that's ranked number 3 in 1A this year.
And 2 rural Wabash County schools, shaping up, right?
This is one of the good matchups for week 1.
They played once already earlier this season. It was a competitive game, but Southwood won it. And where we talked about Peru and maybe being a soft 7-2, we've seen them not be able to back it up in the playoffs. Conversely, Southwood has been able to. They've gotten some big wins over the last couple years in the playoffs. They've developed a bit of a rivalry with Adams Central, whether they meet up in the sectional or the regional. So Northfield clipped Southwood last year. The year before that, they lose big. Southwood lose big to Adams Central in the sectional championship game, but they've met in regional in the past as well. So I think this is shaping up to be an Adams Central Southwood matchup. And don't discount the Knights because they've proven in the past that they can get it done in the playoffs.
Busco goes on the road in this one at Triton. They're 4-3, but it seems they're Jekyll and Hyde in the fact that when they face a team that they should beat, they stomp them.
Yeah.
When they face a team that's probably a little bit better than them, they seem to get blown out. Like there's no
middle ground.
There's
right?
no middle ground with this Busco team. But I think with the fact that they rely on a lot of sophomores who now have a full season of experience, they're almost like juniors, and you're a lot more difficult to prepare for, given that these guys have gotten a lot of experience. And what I think Coach Sade would have said and did say at the beginning of the season, it's going to be a little bit of a rebuilding year for us.
And it's a winnable game going on the road. And I think this will really develop this team going into next year and the year after, because they're playing so many sophomores, so many juniors. I feel like this team's a year away from being in the conversation in this sectional. But you're completely right. In their 4 wins, they've dominated, and their 3 losses, they've gotten dominated. I think it's like 94-7 or 6 or something like that. They've been outscored in their 3 losses.
That sounds about right.
So when they play a really good team, they struggle to be competitive. But when you look around the field and you see guys like Hunter Byansky and a bunch of other skill guys that are very good, and you're going down the list, and all of them are sophomores and juniors, this is a rebuilding year. But I think this Friday is a very good learning lesson for this team, win or lose, going on the road against a competent opponent in the postseason. These are the games that pay off in the seasons to come.
Final question, what are you most looking forward to about this week? Obviously, without 6A, without 5A, we're without some key matchups and some really good games that we're going to see next week. Well, how do you see this week playing out, and what are you most looking forward to?
Well, I'm looking forward to some key games. Everybody talks about wishing that the playoffs were seeded, the sectionals were, but for you and I, we do not want one single week with a bunch of big games, right? We like them spread out. So we get a couple teases this week. You get Leo Northridge on the road. You get Eastside Bluffton on the at Bluffton. It's a good game. A couple of those 4A games as well. So I think we sprinkled in some decent matchups with some blowouts. So I think it's a good mix. And then we can get into next week and then the week after. So in sectional championship week, we're not freaking out because we have like 11 really good games throughout the area.
It is true. Some things just tend to work themselves out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is the way it works out on Friday nights for us on the Highlight Zone
for sure.
the most time, you know. A little bit here, a little bit there. We'll do our best to have it covered this coming Friday, and then we'll be back Monday with Justin to talk about round 2 of sectional play here on Inside the Zone. But for this week, he's Justin, I'm Glenn, and we'll see you next Monday.